And we're back. We have two ladies today, Sarah Court and Laurel Beversdorf. Thank y'all for coming on. I found y'all through Adam Meekins maybe a few months ago. He was hyping y'all up on an episode that y'all were being interviewed on. I forgot what the name of the podcast was, but I listened to it and was super impressed. It was kind of debunking some of McGill's claims. Do y'all remember
Conspirituality
That's right.
podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I looked into both y'all's resources and information and thought, okay, this would be great to have you on with what y'all discuss. You have your own podcast. There's a lot. So let's start with introductions. Laurel, I'll have you go first. Who are you? What do you do? A little background, and then we'll go into Sarah.
Hi, I'm Laurel Beversdorf, and I am a strength coach, yoga teacher, and running and pickleball enthusiast. I am in cahoots with Dr. Sarah Court to convince women around our age and older to strength train, specifically with barbells and progressing toward lifting heavy weights.
Yeah. And I'm Sarah Court. I'm a physical therapist, doctor of physical therapy. And I work both in a clinic. I work at an orthopedic outpatient clinic. I also have private practice where I see patients, both ortho and neuro patients. But my passion is convincing women who are coming out of rehab potentially and creating sort of a pipeline from rehab to actually strength training, barbell lifting, becoming stronger than they were before they came into rehab. And that's where Laurel and I are cahooting around with our company. I never know what to call it. Partnership called Movement Logic. We are Movement Logic, the two of us together, and we have tutorials and we have a live 6-month barbell lifting course for women. So we're really on the strength train. Not to pun, but I guess that sort of was a pun.
Yeah, that was good. So you all have a podcast, Movement Logic. Your website is Movement Logic, and your Instagram. There's a variety of places people can listen and learn and watch y'all teach. And a lot of what you educate on is some of these myths and misconceptions of resistance training, how people view their bodies with certain activities and movement practices such as yoga. And so we're going to dive into some of those kind of major myths today and maybe some better views and narratives that could be more helpful long term. If you listen to y'all's podcast or any information you put out, it's obvious that y'all are skeptical and you're trying to provide more evidence-based information. I'm curious if there was a transition in both y'all's kind of education and practice that created that, or do you think early on you were just naturally inclined to be that way? And I'm sure y'all both have separate stories. So Sarah, I'll let you start. How did you kind of initiate that process of skepticism?
Well, to your question of was I always skeptical, in a word, no. I started my movement teaching career as a yoga teacher, and my source of information around, movement, alignment, position, posture, what was safe, what was dangerous, was my only source for all of that information was my yoga teacher training. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but particular in the yoga world, you're kind of discouraged from questioning things, right? Or looking outside the training for other answers or providing, evidence to suggest maybe it is safe for your knee to go here and not there. My perspective started to change when people would ask me questions when I was teaching a yoga class, and I literally I joke that I would just back away slowly because I had no answer for them. They'd be like, why does it hurt my hip when I do triangle pose? And I would be like, just don't do it. So I found that personally really unsatisfying. And so I realized I needed to start to look outside for more information. What a lot of yoga teachers do is what I did, which is I still looked within the yoga model, within the yoga world. So I just found like another type of yoga that claimed to have more accurate kind of anatomical, physiological, basis. And for those, if there's any yoga teachers listening, this was Anusara, which is now defunct because the person who ran it was, that's a whole other story. But if you look up Anusara yoga, you'll find out about what happened with that. So it was different rules, but it was still sort of dogmatic in its approach that like this had to be here and this had to be there. And it wasn't until I actually started learning something called yoga tune-up, which is sort of a yoga and movement and self-massage with therapy balls modality that really encouraged me to start questioning a lot of things that I just sort of accepted wholesale. And then from there, I went on to become a physical therapist. And that's where I really just started questioning everything. I remember one really big moment was, in yoga, you sort of get used to people with these huge ranges of motion and, a lot of hypermobility. And so my sort of vague understanding was that the goal, if you were lying on your back and you were bringing one leg up into hip flexion, keeping your leg straight, the goal was that eventually your foot should be somewhere like near your ear, for everybody. And I remember so clearly, it was the first semester of PT school, and there's that book, that classic book that shows all of the, ranges of motion, appropriate ranges of motion or something. It's like a goniometry book maybe. And I saw that like, a typical and appropriate range of motion for hip flexion was 90 degrees. And I was like, what? So that really started to blow my mind, all of these things where I had accepted, these other ideas, but then started to learn that most all of them were inaccurate. And it was really when I started getting really serious about strength training, specifically barbell work and heavy lifting, which was a couple of years ago, that I discovered that how impactful it was just on my overall resilience. Like previously, I would always have this kind of nagging neck, upper back, upper trap pain that I would wake up with in the morning, and it went away, And so what I started to understand was the kinds of exercise that women are encouraged to do, like yoga or Pilates or a cardio dance class or things like that, I started to realize that they were all doing me a disservice by suggesting that they were enough for my physical needs. So that was my journey.
Laurel, how about
Yeah.
yourself?
All right. Yes. And actually, no, I was not always skeptical. Similar to Sarah, I kind of bought into a lot of the beliefs and narratives we're going to discuss today. And I actually think that's one of the reasons we are so focused on these narratives. I'll speak for myself, but I think Sarah and I, we've talked a lot about these and we have a similar past. We fully bought into them. I fully bought into them. But a couple of things that rocked my world is, I spent a lot of time helping my students refine, but really kind of perfect their alignment. I thought that their alignment, like how they looked in the pose, how they arranged their body in the pose, could prevent them from being injured. I also thought that what their alignment looked like, if it wasn't some ideal that I had in my mind that I preferred, it would, potentially indicate that they were going to have some type of injury result from their practice. I thought that there were definitely right and wrong ways to align or safe and unsafe ways to practice. And that, everyone should pretty much like kind of look the same, which is the right way, the safe way. But then what rocked my world is I started having people come up to me and being like, that thing you told me to do with my shoulder, or that thing you told me to do with my hip or my knee or whatever, is like, it really hurts when I do that. Like, I've had some shoulder pain now for a while since I started trying to, externally rotate my shoulder. I had this idea that everyone's shoulders had to be like maximally externally rotated in downward facing dog. And that was like the safe position to avoid shoulder impingement, which, as we know, like, not really a thing. But anyway, I was, making all of these claims and insisting on all of these positions, a lot of them end range, not comfortable for everyone, and couching it all in this, like, this is the safe way to do it. So also very nocivic. And then additionally, what else rocked my world is that I actually started to have pain. I started to have really gnarly hip pain, like keep me up at night. Started Googling hip replacement, like really lots of ethical sort of type questioning of what it was that I was doing. Like I'm practicing yoga. That's all I do, right? I only practice yoga. As like Sarah pointed out, it's a very insular community. You're kind of encouraged to like do a lot of yoga. It's all you need to do. Don't look elsewhere. And I was doing a lot of yoga, and I was teaching yoga, and I was teaching teachers how to teach other people yoga. And I was like, holy cow, like maybe this whole system, this whole way of moving is just inherently bad. And then I got really down on yoga. I was in a lot of pain. And actually that's where I started to make a change. And it came from having to stop practicing yoga and being really forced to go somewhere else for the solution. And I too practiced yoga tune-up. I rolled on therapy balls. That helped for a while, but then I quickly realized that just rolling around on a therapy ball was not going to also offer me this long-term solution to my pain. So then I was like, okay, fine, I'll strength train. Jeez. And so I hired a personal trainer. And I think it was within like a week or two, like my hip pain, poof, disappeared. Now, there's a lot of confounding variables, okay? One is that because I started strength training a lot and I also stopped practicing yoga for a while, it could be that my pain was also reduced by that, right? I just wasn't doing so much of this activity. And I do also think it was the increased variability of just moving in different ways with strength training, but also just improving my strength. Like it was almost immediate. So that's really was the shift, the catalyst for change was like pain. Okay. Pain forced me out of this insular echo chamber and made me realize that actually I should probably start learning more than just what I'm hearing from this community. And then I was also stronger and also a little bit more emboldened and empowered. And I started to feel like badass. And I was like, you know what? This ain't right. Like, why are you saying this stuff? Because the more I learned, the more I realized that what I had been learning in the past was like not in everybody's best interest, especially the older women who tend to make up the majority of people practicing yoga, like dissuading them from strength training. And I started to actually speak out about these myths, these narratives, sort of kind of establish myself as a little bit of a, I don't know, maybe a disruptor, maybe a leader in the community. Started to like really champion the idea that like you can do both. You can strength train and you can do yoga. They are not incompatible.
Let's go into these 4 myths. And I asked you all in that outline to choose whatever ones you feel like is the most salient and you wanted to dive into. So I'll let either of y'all highlight what the 4 are, and then we're just going to go one by one and discuss some of these common myths in yoga and just the movement practice world.
Yeah, I'll just keep it really quick. So, number 1, yoga and Pilates are all you need for exercise. It's a one-stop shop. You don't need to go anywhere else. Myth number 2, strength training is somehow more dangerous or more complicated than other forms of exercise. So, you might want to second guess that choice. Be careful. Number 3, for women, strength training will make you bulky. So, you sure you want to do that? And then myth number 4, for the yoga practitioners, especially, women, but probably also some men, strength training will make you less flexible, and then you won't be able to advance in your yoga practice. And if you're a teacher, you won't be seen as competent if you're not able to do these poses that many of them require this big range of motion, because of course, if you strength train, you're going to get a whole bunch of muscle on your body. Then you'll be muscle bound and then you won't be as flexible. So those are the big 4.
Let's start with the first one. Let's what is it again? And then let's dive into it. Why is it so popular and such a strong belief in this community or communities?
Yeah. So I'll start with that. So the first myth is the idea that yoga and or Pilates and other group fitness classes that don't involve any heavy resistance training, the pink dumbbells maybe, right? And maybe a band, that this is all you need for your body and for your health. And so I think, there's a bunch of reasons why this became popular. And I would say there's a sort of subset, there's a different set of reasons for the yoga world specifically versus the other kind of movement worlds. Like I was saying earlier, yoga communities, they tend to be very insular. They don't tend to be very scientific places to hang out as a student or as a teacher. They are community building. And part of the community is this idea that you are focusing on, quote unquote, traditional bodies of knowledge that come from other countries, like in this case, India, right? And it's lineage based, it's information that's handed down. So it's very, without purposely saying this is unscientific, it does not, they don't bother themselves particularly with, up to date evidence, research, things like that. And it's, you know, uh, some yoga communities, I mean, I was part of one in particular that was like that, have a bit of a, uh, high demand group characteristic. They have like charismatic leaders. There's teachers that they call themselves gurus. You might be like bowing down to them. They're imparting this, mystical, quote unquote, mystical traditional knowledge from India. And then it's just sort of this game of telephone, right? It's kind of this like wacky game of telephone where whoever was the creator of this particular style of yoga, the mastermind, you do or teach as they say, and you just repeat the wisdom they impart and you don't question it. And it's sort of an unspoken rule that you asking challenging questions reflects badly on you. And your job is not to question, but instead to try to just understand why the teacher is right. Right. I remember my first teacher training on day 3, I stuck my hand up because I had a question. And I was basically just completely shot down. And I, at that point, was like, oh, okay, well, I guess the vibe here is no questions allowed, right? And in particular, if you're a teacher, you know, it, it can actually impact your future hireability. If you're trying to get hired at a yoga studio to teach and you go through their teacher training, but the senior teachers, right, who are leading the training kind of pigeonhole you as like, oh, the difficult one, the one who asks questions, the one who's making it harder for me to just hand you this teacher training, wholesale. They might say to the studio owner, hey, this person's really tough, like you may not want to hire them, they're going to be a pain in your butt. So a quote unquote good yogi, instead of questioning ideas, just is more of this like everything is a lesson. You're supposed to learn to live with your intellectual discomfort or your physical discomfort. I had a lot of hip pain in my teacher training. Turns out I needed a hip replacement, but I was told just to, absorb it. And, in that way, there's sort of this like high demand group feeling of like, don't you want to be with us? We're doing something special. We're doing something different than the rest of the world. So then you just kind of believe that if you practice yoga asana, you don't have to do any other physical exercise. When I was a new yoga teacher, I believed it. Other people believed it about me. They were like, you're so healthy because you're a yoga teacher. But then I would, try to run for a bus and I would get out of breath, So I was like, well, okay, maybe something is missing here. But there is this, there's a huge social, spiritual component to the yoga world where it's just sort of like this is how it is, and this is what you're supposed to do and behave and teach, and you're not supposed to question it. And so that can be very appealing for people. When we talk about something like Pilates, right, we have another charismatic leader in Joseph Pilates, and we did a podcast episode about the myth of long and lean, or the scourge of this idea of being long and lean for women. So, and we talk about this in that series. Pilates, it's not so much this kind of mystical belief that yoga is enough for everything, but it's more that like, Pilates is going to make you look like a ballerina. And in theory, supposedly ballerinas are healthy. So therefore I will be healthy, right? And we do find from the Pilates community, there is pushback that, there is cardio and strength involved because you have a reformer and the reformer has springs for resistance, or there's something called a jump board where you can end up, in a horizontal plane doing jumping movements. It's great for rehab. I love it. But none of these things, except for maybe the very deconditioned or somebody coming back from an injury, is actually going to give anyone meaningful, significant load and then also progressive overload. One time I was like, is the jump board cardio? And I put on my heart rate monitor and I did a bunch of this like horizontal jumping and my heart rate barely cleared 100. So it's really not. And the thing as well is, in all of these communities, it's 90% or more women students, women teachers, right? So you're surrounded by people who look like you, or people you aspire to look like or be like. The teacher at the front of the room. You maybe you don't know that much about what healthy actually means from a exercise perspective, but you know that the teacher has a dancer body, or they have a yoga body, therefore they must be healthy. So they're your sort of source of aspiration. And the teachers are the sort of the number one marketing source for the studio, based on their popularity. They'll teach a quote unquote hard class and you're sweating in a room for over an hour with a bunch of other people. So that must be enough, right? But, the studio where I originally taught, there was a teacher in that studio who was teaching who was on hard drugs. And it was sort of a known secret. And they're still teaching yoga. So this idea that like you must automatically be healthy because it's just not true.
Yeah, the visual aspect of just looking at someone and assuming they're healthy, or that because they're the instructor, is not the reality. And I'm sure that goes outside of just yoga and Pilates with how popular a lot of these other camps or groups are, like looking at your favorite Peloton instructor or your Lululemon instructor or your Orange Theory. You have no clue the dynamics of their life outside of it. And also, a lot of those individuals have, bad views of themselves and their bodies, and maybe they are in an extremely unhealthy position. So yeah, that probably extends outside of just yoga and Pilates. Anything else you wanted to add to this kind of first myth, Laurel or Sarah?
I would just add that I think that, at least from the yoga community standpoint, and from my, of course, completely curated algorithmic experience on Instagram, that the people that I'm seeing on Instagram who practice yoga are really moving the community forward in terms of trying to change a lot of this kind of a little bit culty, a little bit dogmatic, a little bit insular type feel, and really encourage their students and act as role models, as people who do strength train, people who do engage in other forms of exercise, and who encourage their students to do the same. So I guess I just want to say that I think that we're making progress, but I do also know that this is still very much alive and well in a lot of very popular styles of yoga. So, and I'm not as familiar. I'm also not as familiar with Pilates. I'll just also say that transparently. Sarah's got a little bit more insider knowledge into that.
Yeah, and I would say sort of the same thing is true for the Pilates world. There are certain teachers who are bringing more strength, like literally bringing kettlebells into the studio. But again, my algorithm, what I'm seeing are the people who look like me and are doing what I'm doing. So there's definitely still, every now and then I'll see something about like, look how long and lean this woman's muscles are. It must be. I remember Miley Cyrus and the Grammys, and the Pilates world exploded because they were like, her body is because of Pilates. And it's like, well, no, her body is because of genetics. Maybe there's some Pilates involved.
And what she is, eating and not eating.
Right.
And how much she's eating.
Let's go to myth number 2.
All right. Strength training is somehow more dangerous / complicated than other forms of exercise. So be careful out there, people. Why this became popular, I think probably just capitalism. I think it's a great way to market. Let's differentiate ourselves from our competitors. So let's point out, what they're doing wrong. They're, teaching dangerous strength training exercises, or they're teaching these exercises in a dangerous way, or they're just not, teaching it the right way. And if you do this like series of bracing techniques or align your body in just this perfect way, it'll be more effective. And so coaches are suggesting that basically, if you do it this way, you're putting your health at risk, or you're not doing it right. So here's the solution: do it this different special way. I will teach you. Or, I see this a lot because the social media algorithm feeds me a lot of mobility coaches. I often see mobility coaches demonizing strength training. So they want you to like earn your right to squat by doing all of these mobility routines and, working on your ankle dorsiflexion, or working on this or that, joints range of motion before you earn the right to. So you earn the right to do whatever strength exercise. But basically, I think this is just really great marketing, right? You have to name the problem. Even if you invent it, there's no evidence required for marketing. It's not a science, right? You name a problem, you offer the solution, and hopefully you're pretty charismatic, right? This whole process is often done under the guise of making it safer, right? We're in the exercise industry where, performance is wrapped up in aesthetics, which is wrapped up in health. And so all of these things get conflated, just as you mentioned, Chris, like we see someone who looks aesthetically beautiful and we assume they're also healthy. Right? And so I think that this whole process is kind of done under this guise of making you safer, making you healthier, so that people, with our negativity bias, this is just a part of how we think. We tend to focus on the threats in our environment, the possible dangers ahead. And so we think like, oh, strength training. I'm hearing all this information about deadlifts and flexing my spine and blowing out my knees in squats. And I'm thinking like, forget about it. This whole thing over here called strength training, this looks friggin' dangerous. So, if I have some money more than the average bear, I'm going to hire a personal trainer, probably one of the ones that like noceboed me into, fearing strength training, or maybe not. I think hiring a personal trainer is probably an amazing choice if you have the money, but a lot of people don't have that money. So there's like, okay, I definitely am not going to be able to do this and not hurt myself. So maybe I'll just stick to the safe, light, pink highlighter colored dumbbells, the nice light resistance bands, or I'll just do yoga, Pilates, things that are like safe, light resistance equals safe. Or it just all seems so complicated and there's no way I'm going to be able to figure this out without messing it up. And so I think that ultimately this is why it exists. I think another reason why this idea that strength training is dangerous or complicated exists specifically for women is that, like women are less likely to engage in strength training than men. I feel like there's probably a little bit of the patriarchy at work here where, in society, in the messages that we receive as women, we're often infantilized. We're often treated as though we're delicate, we're fragile, we're just, let me help you with that. Or, be careful, sweetie. You sure you got that? And kind of in many ways, sort of conditioned to constantly be questioning our competency and questioning ourselves. And so I also think that this message that strength training is a little dangerous, it's a little complicated, really plays into this dynamic as well with women. Especially with lifting heavy, especially with lifting barbells. I mean, that's why Sarah and I are like, wow, we just convinced 90 women to sign up for a barbell course. We had no idea if that was going to work, but we were like, we want them lifting heavy, and I think barbells are the best tool. Let's start a podcast. And it happened, but it actually, I think, required a podcast to like be in people's ears for many hours, like rewriting this programming, rewriting this software, right? That has been sort of installed in our collective unconscious that like, it's just strength training is so dangerous, especially for women, right? Social media is also a big player here. Like people are very easily swayed by charismatic people who speak with high levels of conviction, even though their claims totally lack evidence. Like it's just not true that strength training is dangerous when compared to other forms of exercise, but that doesn't matter if someone who's really attractive, who has a really big following, who speaks with conviction, says that it is. And like, here's all these special complicated ways that you can make it safer. Don't strength train, do mobility instead. There's also a fixation, especially on Instagram and TikTok, on form and technique, because these are visual mediums. It's really hard to make a post that you want to have engagement on about proper load management and progression strategies. Like that's not something that's going to like work in a 30-second reel. But that's really kind of the crux of how to make a strength exercise effective and safe for someone is basically, how are you managing load for this individual, right? That's the other thing too, is like, it's really hard to create prescriptions for stuff like this when it's so case by case and individual. It's just not something you can do very easily on social media. So this kind of brings us back to the marketing thing too, which is like, but we can very easily put a red X on the screen and show this wrong way of doing the exercise and a green check mark. And like, that just, makes it so much easier for us to talk about strength trainings. We just focus on form and technique in a binary way, good and bad, safe and unsafe. I think all of these forces are playing into this belief or this narrative that strength training is dangerous or just overly complicated.
If you're a clinician and you're treating an individual that primarily practices yoga or Pilates and has some of these views, and to rehab them, there needs to be this progressive load, and there's this friction that they have because of these beliefs. Or another example is you're a yoga teacher and you yourself are promoting loading and progressive strength training, and you have a few yoga, what do you call them, practitioners or students that are maybe pushing back or hesitant. How do you all advise either the practitioner or the provider to go about informing them without just having so much cognitive dissonance where they just push back even further?
From a clinical perspective, I mean, one of the things that I see in the clinic a lot, relatively speaking, is I get people who come to me who've been to other PTs, and the other PT has actually not rehabbed them purely because they have not allowed them to do anything, out of alignment or out of form, or they're not allowing them to use weights or until like something looks exactly like it's supposed to look, right? And then as a result, they're just more deconditioned than when they went into PT. And so I have some of those patients where it's not that hard to convince them because they can feel it in themselves. They're like, wow, I'm not in as good shape as I was before I started trying to rehab my shoulder or my neck or whatever. And so my big thing is for other physical therapists is, we tend to, or for some people, they tend to think that like maybe the 10-pound dumbbell, but definitely like a 5 or an 8-pound dumbbell, and then like the red TheraBand, maybe the green TheraBand is where rehab stops. Instead of thinking about strength as a continuum, and the earliest stages that you might be rehabbing, like someone coming back from a total hip replacement or something like that, where they're doing, less than body weight movement or body weight movement. But then the continuum all the way up to barbells it's just a series of progressive overload. And I think that it would be really helpful if physical therapists either themselves then continued their patients' rehab past this kind of, quote unquote rehab level, and actually got them into more strength, or had personal trainers. I mean, the clinic where I work, we have a full gym with a rack and barbells and everything on one side, and we have personal trainers. And so it's easy for me in a way because I can just sort of funnel them into that side, or I take them over there and I'm like, we're going to do this together. And I think sometimes this fear of the safety around lifting, I think for some people it's very helpful to have a PT there, because then they're like, okay, this person at least has a degree, they're going to keep me safe. And then it's through their own experience of it. I mean, the number of times it's so thrilling for me, especially with women. When I have patients come in, I kind of flag some of them like, oh, this is a person that I'm going to, at some point, get using barbells. And I have to then, it tends to be kind of person by person, look at what's their personality, how much are they pushing back against this idea. Do I have to, start them on the 5-pound dumbbells and slowly make my way up? We have a technique bar that only weighs 15 pounds. So if it's not hard for me to convince them, if they're holding 2 10-pound dumbbells to do squats, they could also do a squat with a 15-pound bar. It's going to be easier. And so a big part of the discovery for a lot of women is realizing that a barbell is actually in a lot of ways way easier, way less complicated to manage than dumbbells or kettlebells. And I try to use my patients' own experiences as a way to convince them. So, I try to get them to lift the technique bar, and then maybe we add a little weight to the technique bar, and then we make our way up to the big bar, and we just kind of progressively go through. And for a lot of the people I work, I mean, it is mostly women that I'm focusing on with this, because I tend to find that my male patients aren't afraid of going back to the gym or going back to lifting, or they may, have a trainer they work with already. So it's generally the women where there's this deficit, or there's complete lack of, serious resistance training in their exercise regimen. And it's so satisfying. It's one of my favorite things when I see a woman lift a barbell for this first time, and this happens quite often. And then, we do 6 deadlifts or something, and they put it down and they're like, that felt good. I'm like, yeah, that did feel good. They're like, that wasn't hard at all. I'm like, no, that wasn't hard. And I can see, their experience gives them the excitement and the realization that it's not dangerous. It's not hard. It feels good. It imparts a quality for women as well that is very empowering, psychologically, emotionally, in a way that sticking to, the little highlighter dumbbells and the yellow resistance band just doesn't. Those are just reminders that this is all you can handle. This is all that's appropriate for you. And to help women get over that idea and then realize, oh, wait, no, not only is this appropriate for me, this is good for me. I like this. I'm going to keep working on this. Right. But it's a process. It's definitely a process. And there's a fair amount of hand-holding sometimes that I have to do in order to get women to get to barbells and not jump ship.
I'm sure y'all have had this common experience, but I do notice it more in the middle to older adult females that don't have a ton of lifting experience, where I'm introducing a deadlift, and it's easy in our clinic to just ramp up kettlebell deadlifts as an easy starting point. And they'll do a set of 10, and I'll ask, how much do you think that weighs? And they always undershoot by like half or triple. And they'll say like, oh, 15 pounds. And I say, oh, that was a 53-pound kettlebell. And they're like shocked. And even just those like moments of immediately realizing that they would have never expected that was the weight that they could lift. And they haven't even really consistently trained up to this point. But the fact that they realize they're strong enough to do that provides that kind of momentum to move forward. So yeah, it's cool to see in the clinic people that either just generally have not exercised for a variety of reasons, or they just have really unfortunate views of their body, or that they can't do this thing, and then they are conflicted when they realize that they can. It's super powerful.
Yeah. One of the things that we have seen, one of the things that we saw in our bone density barbell course, there were a few times when we would get messages from the practitioners where they're like, I went to do my deadlift and I accidentally put twice as much weight on the bar, didn't realize it, and I did it, and I had no problem. So yeah, I think we tend to underload or under we don't think we're as strong as we are ultimately.
Yeah. Laurel, did you have anything to add to my initial question about how to combat some of these beliefs? Sarah did it from like a clinical perspective. Do you have any thoughts or ideas of how to do that during a yoga class or with students?
Yeah, with my one-on-ones, a lot of times I just started working with someone who has gone through a bout of back pain, and she went to her physical therapist for a number of sessions, and she's graduated beyond physical therapy, and now she wants to work with me. And her thought was like, I want to just strengthen my core, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do whole body strength training. We're going to start with a weight that you feel is you're perfectly capable of lifting. We're going to lift it some times. We're going to do some sets. We're going to see how that feels. We're going to go step by step. We're going to play it by ear. And in so doing, we're going to make your whole body stronger. And that's going to help your back. There's going to be crossover into your core. Are you on board with me? And they're typically like, yeah. So the thing I do is I share with them what my plan is and how we're going to reach their goal I listen to what they say. I work what they say into the plan. And I try to be very encouraging and very hopeful and very enthusiastic about how I think this is going to go. And then also leaving the lines of communication open always via text, via however we're exchanging messages. Like, how did you feel? Do you think we need to adjust anything? When it comes to teaching a group yoga class, when I was teaching in New York City and only teaching yoga, but also strength training, I started to just drop in, basically like facts into the class, like everyone probably could benefit from strength training in this room. This pose you're doing will feel like butter if you do some strength training. It feels hard, but when you're stronger, it feels a lot easier. And one of the best ways to get stronger is picking up some heavier weights. And, I would just kind of lead, I guess, by example, and just kind of allow my enthusiasm for what I'm doing to kind of bubble over into what it is that I'm teaching, relate to my students as friends, relate to them as peers, relate to them as equals and not as like, I don't know, above them, and kind of put myself on their team. And I don't know. I mean, I always tend to trust the person who's like trying to get me out of their class or out of their clinic, or they're trying to actually graduate me in some way, shape, or form. They're not giving me messages that like they're all I need, or the thing that they're selling is the only thing I need. I guess that's the skeptical side of me, but I guess I just try to be really honest with my students and clients, and I don't try to like sell them on ideas that I hope I don't try to sell them on ideas that I don't feel are in their best interest. So, I told this new client, I was like, hey, I think I want you to go back to your physical therapist one more time. Like, no rush, right? We don't need to start this yet. Why don't you go back and see her one more time? And I think just being really, because I had some concerns, and just being really honest with her, I think, or at least for some people, I think it earns they're like suddenly like, oh, maybe you aren't just feeding me a line of bullshit to get my money, Hopefully that answered your question.
It did.
Okay.
Let's go myth number 3. Whoever wants to take this one.
Yeah. So myth number 3 is that for women, strength training will make you bulky. And so once again, it's the patriarchy. So, there's a lot of messaging in society, in the media, that is maybe not overtly, but covertly finding ways to disempower women. And it's a very simple way to maintain, the quote unquote correct social hierarchy, right? Which is that women are less powerful than men, basically, right? So one of the ways this plays out is the way that we see women exercising in the media. It's, with a light dumbbell or light resistance or cardio. And my favorite part is they're always managing to like smile or laugh or have perfect hair and makeup, and they don't look sweaty or messy, right? This is the idea. And so this then for a lot of women becomes a form of internalized misogyny. They start to believe that it's like this message is actually coming from themselves. They don't want to be bulky because they don't want to be bulky, not because someone else is telling them that, right? They've internalized it. So there's so many examples of that. Like when we were talking just now about people who are hesitant around, in the rehab world, going from their rehab to working with barbells. I had a older woman patient recently who was a fantastic, in my mind, candidate to start lifting heavy. She had recovered from a surgery. She was generally in good shape. She wasn't deconditioned. We had been doing a lot of reformer Pilates. I had started working with, 3 pounds and then 5 pounds and then 10-pound dumbbells. And finally I got her to lift a technique bar, and we did a little bit of lifting. And I think we maybe did it in 2 sessions. And then the next time she came in, she was furious. And the whole clinic was like, what is happening? Because she started basically yelling at me that weightlifting was making her bulky and she didn't want to do it anymore. And all she wanted to do was Pilates, and we were not going to do any more of this weightlifting because it was making her, I think she thought it was making her fat, honestly, or just too big. And, patient-centered care. I'm going to offer her the correct information, which is there's no way in hell that 2 or 3 sessions suddenly transformed you into this like hulking mass. And perhaps it's because you're actually gaining weight because you're eating enough, because you were actually a little bit underweight previously. But if you don't want to do it, we won't do it. So I've had so many examples of that with patients or with clients from when I was a yoga teacher. And the message essentially is that bulky is bad. Bulky is to be avoided. Women who are bulky look like men. Why don't they want to be more feminine? Feminine is something called toned, which is kind of this like dog whistle language among women, this kind of perfect, quote, long and lean. You can see a muscle, but it's not, it doesn't look oversized, right? And, when we live in this world of just such narrowly defined concept of what is beautiful or what is appropriate, what you should be striving for, all that does for women is keep them in this disempowered position where your focus is to maintain this kind of thin, long, lean body, or try to achieve it via diet, exercise, whatever you're doing. If you get bulky, you're going to be less valued in society, right? You may not be attractive enough to a partner. You will become a childless cat lady, right? The worst possible outcome to be avoided at all costs, right? And this gets reinforced in the world of yoga and Pilates because, sort of as we discussed a bit earlier, the teachers, the person sitting at the front of the room, are typically young, attractive, former or current dancers, gymnasts, right? This physical ideal that we're supposed to be reaching for, when in fact they got there through genetics more than anything else, right? So this idea that bulky is bad is something that I'm personally on a bit of a crusade about it at the moment. And I've started a hashtag called Bulky Girl Summer because I just want us to get around this idea that that being bulky is a negative quality, understanding that this is not just facts, right? This is a messaging that has been put on women that a lot of us have internalized and believed to just be factual and true, when in fact the actual truth, the healthier body, is the complete opposite.
Yeah, I think there has been a shift over the past 5, 10, 15 years from a positive framing of training and hard training and building muscle with women from the lens of the growth of CrossFit and how much more accepted training really hard is, and resistance training, and how that stemmed into these other kind of like subcultures of more women entering powerlifting and strongman and weightlifting. And I think that's been extremely helpful from pushing the confidence of women to do those things. And then the normalcy of seeing like a very muscular, capable woman is becoming more and more common in those areas. And it's probably bleeding into other realms of fitness. You kind of already alluded to it, but do you all have any other ideas or recommendations on, with this myth, how to manage those expectations? And to that example, Sarah, if a patient comes in and they're frustrated because they think you're making them bulky, how do you navigate those conversations?
Well, a lot of the time, the way that, and we've done this, the way that we, myth bust this is we explain to women that, like, in order to get what you're calling bulky, you would have to be doing such a higher volume of training, such a higher volume of lifting, eating more, possibly taking some sort of a steroid or some sort of a hormonal, treatment to try to make your muscles bigger. And so that's the message that we counteract with, where we say, like, well, okay, yes, you're scared of it, but it's not going to happen to you. Like, it's really basically for most women, it's not going to happen unless you went after strength training in this really focused kind of a way. But what ultimately is a bit of a problem with that message is that we're agreeing that you don't want to get bulky by saying, oh, don't worry, you won't get bulky. When in fact, the bigger underlying message really needs to be, what's wrong with bulky? Why do you think it's such a bad idea? Why is it unattractive? Why are you swallowing this idea wholesale and not questioning it, right? Who told you that small and weak is pretty? And do they have your best interests in mind? It is definitely changing, but at the same time, in a lot of ways, it continues to be out there. And there's a rugby player in the Olympics named Ilona Mayer and Ilona Maher, and I follow her because I find her really funny, and she's a great example of a woman who, she talks about how she's 5'10", she weighs I think 200 pounds, but her body is something like 85% lean muscle, right? So technically she falls into the obese category on the BMI, but she's not obese, right? So just creating more challenges to this, ultimately unempowering image that you shouldn't have muscles on your body. I think just questioning this idea that bulky is bad is really where we need to get to.
We work with an older population too of women who have maybe moved a little bit away from needing to police their appearance to the extent that they maybe were involved in doing that, or maybe they weren't. But we play up a lot of the health benefits of muscle mass, of basically banking muscle. Get as much of it as you can, basically, while you can. And this idea that having more muscle on your body is connected to living a longer life, but also a higher quality life. Connecting the meaning of muscle to what it means to take care of people, what it means to have grandchildren, what it means to travel, what it means to be able to live in your house longer, what it means to be able to garden and do all the other things that give your life meaning, so that we start to separate muscle from aesthetics and connect it to what makes our lives meaningful. And same thing with bone density. And I think that we're also able to reach younger women this way as well, though I think we tend to, draw 35 to 75-year-old pretty much according to the stats that I see. But yeah, we're not as popular amongst the Gen Z yet. But yeah, we've got the millennials, we have to work on our and the Gen Xers, slang. Millennials, Gen Xers, maybe a couple boomers, and yeah, I think we are also making examples of ourselves. Sarah and I, in terms of how we show up in our bodies and the honesty with which we talk about our own insecurities around the same things that we know that other women are grappling with. Like, I think the last thing I want to do is shame women for being afraid of their place and value in society, because that is a very real threat. If you feel that you are valued based on your appearance, and many women frankly are, they're commodified and basically not necessarily valued, but commodified based on their appearance, which gets mixed up with valued, that it is actually just a little too simple to say, you know what, get over it. Just build some muscle. You'll be fine. Because it speaks to, one of our most, I think, core anxieties as people is like where we fit in here, and how we make up this group of people that we survive with. So I don't want to sound grandiose or anything, but Sarah and I are trying, I think, to shift the focus. We have a lot of competition in terms of like the types of messaging that we're running up against and having to combat, and speak out against. But yeah, we're trying to maybe get people to reframe muscle, reframe what it means to be in a woman's body, a strong woman's body, whether that involves having a lot of muscle or not, and playing up those positive aspects of training, maybe kind of shifting the focus to that.
Let's go final myth, number 4.
Sure.
Whoever wants to take it.
That'd be me. Strength training will make you less flexible. This is definitely a fear that I had. I played sports and was kind of a stiffer newbie to strength training, or to yoga. I played sports all throughout high school and didn't do much in the way of trying to increase my flexibility. And then I started doing yoga in college and I was like, holy cow, this is hard because I'm not flexible. And then started to really create a whole identity, a whole friend base, a whole lifestyle around yoga. It became my career. I was traveling all over the world teaching teacher trainings. And I was like, well, big part of this is that I can do these pretty impressive looking poses because I have the flexibility for it. So I don't want to strength train because if I can't do these things, then again, how will I be valued? How will I fit in here? And so I think there's 2 reasons for the existence of this, which is that one, it kind of misunderstands for some people, right? Strength does not make them less flexible, and it definitely doesn't make them less flexible in all the joints of their body. For me, it might have made my hamstrings a little less flexible, but it made my hips and other ranges of motion more flexible. It increased the flexibility of my shoulders by a lot. And so I saw an increase in range of motion from strength in some places, maybe some decrease in other places. I think it's a misunderstanding of how muscles work because when you go to yoga teacher trainings, you learn a lot about anatomy. Actually, I shouldn't say a lot. You learn a tiny little bit of anatomy, like a speck of anatomy, because it's only 200 hours or 300 hours or whatever. It's not a lot of time for anatomy, but you learn really how to name some parts and where they are, generally speaking. You don't learn about the physiology of muscles and how they contract. So a lot of students of yoga or trainees of yoga come out of trainings not really understanding that a muscle can both lengthen and contract, right? That there's this thing called eccentric muscle contraction. And therefore that stretching and strength are not opposites. They're not binaries, right? You can be strong and flexible. You can lengthen a muscle passively and actively. And so that's one reason for the existence of this myth. And what we do to combat that is we just try to educate people. We just try to explain how cool muscles are and how they work. And also what stretch tolerance is, which is it's multifactorial. There's a lot of things that make your stretching feel uncomfortable, tight. And one of the things that can actually make stretches feel more comfortable is if your body has a little bit more control, a little bit more strength in these poses, you're going to feel like you can go a little further into them. The other reason I think that this myth exists and what we do to combat it is that it's just true that it's good marketing. Again, whether people realize it or not, if you make someone afraid of stepping outside of the thing that you teach or the thing your studio offers, they're less likely to do it. And therefore they might stick around and just see you for all of their exercise needs. Again, yoga's all you need. And be careful with strength training because you'll be worse at yoga if you go strength train. And I think, again, what Sarah and I try to do to combat that, maybe unfortunate disinformation that gets passed around is just to, again, educate people around the fact that getting stronger can actually increase your range of motion. We were talking to Derek Barris on Conspirituality with Julian Walker. He actually shared that when he started to strength train, he's a longtime yoga practitioner and teacher. And he started to strength train, and suddenly back bending poses which were always very difficult for him, started to become easier for him. And I have similar experiences. It's also the case that yoga selects for hypermobile or just hyper flexible practitioners as well, because their bodies bend to the whims of the asanas very easily. They kind of rise up the ladder of physical prowess as it is defined by yoga, where they can do these really impressive looking, externally rotate your foot to your face type poses Sarah was talking about earlier. And hypermobile people, yeah, they might actually lose a little bit of flexibility And that might be okay. Right? Like it might not be a bad thing if they stiffen up a little bit. We talk about that a lot as well. And the issue with hypermobility in yoga oftentimes, just from my anecdotal experience, I don't know a whole lot of research on this, but it seems like people who come to yoga who are hypermobile or seem to have a lot of flexibility, again, because I don't know that they've been formally diagnosed with hypermobility, they also tend to experience this sort of love-hate relationship with the practice where like they're praised. They're like brought up to the front of the class to demonstrate the pose because they can just do it so easily because genetically, like that's what mom and daddy gave them, right? But they're also in a lot of them, a lot of pain, right? So they're being praised for this thing that they can do, but they have a lot of pain. So reaching that hypermobile or hyperflexible population is something that we try to do with regards to busting this myth, which is that if yoga makes you less flexible, might it reduce your pain as well, or might it give you better control, or
Sorry, I think you mean strength training.
Strength training. Sorry, if strength training. Thank you. If strength training reduces your flexibility, might it also be giving you some good things like more control, improved proprioception, the ability to just generate more tension around the joint to support yourself more, to make you stronger, right? So yeah, I think hopefully we can help people first and foremost realize that strength and flexibility are not opposites, and then also convince people that you can have your flexibility and eat your strength too. I don't know what this expression is, but you can have the best of both worlds. And maybe other people like the hypermobile group, hey, listen, maybe it's okay if you can't put your leg behind your neck. What are the other positives that you might get out of this, and might it be worth it?
Yeah, I haven't done this, but just the visual of like showing someone that's skeptical about those things, like Olympic weightlifter, and just the sheer range of motion that they have in those positions that they need for a snatch and a clean and jerk, and how much control and range they have under load. Or even, I don't know his actual name, the like Juji Mufu guy who did like does a ton of splits. And he weighs like 250 pounds and he does it under load. And it's like a lot of this is the specificity of doing the position over time with enough duration, load, frequency, volume, etc. And as you all mentioned, people are going to self-select to want to do those more extreme ranges because they're inherently better at it, or their bodies allow them to get into it. But exactly, it's not this like dichotomy at all times. Let's go into, and we've touched on this with these specific myths, but more broadly, your information on the podcast and other platforms educates on these myths and how to have more productive conversations and more productive kind of ideas and recommendations. But how would you all recommend other yoga practitioners or clinicians try to have these discussions, maybe let's say in their clinic or their yoga practice, where maybe it's not directly to their patients, but it's like to their other colleagues around them? Do you all have suggestions on how to do that in a productive manner?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we've discovered is as we try to put this message out there, there are some people that really will not be dissuaded. In particular, people who are in the yoga is all you need or the Pilates is all you need camps. And we've encountered a few of them on social media. We've done a bit of calling out. It's gone sort of medium well / maybe not that great. And in particular for women, and this is something that I just personally find kind of wild, when anyone's got any amount of like fame or notoriety, they tend to have a bunch of followers that then Stu McGill is an easy example where if you critique Stu McGill on social media, there's this, cabal of people that will just come at you with pitchforks and torches and tell you why you're wrong. Particularly to women who are positing messages like yoga is all you need or Pilates is all you need. I've gotten into just some wild interactions with other women who are defending their teacher, but essentially in the sense of, why are you being so mean to her? Which, which, this idea that women shouldn't be criticized because it's just hard enough out there for a woman. I'm sorry, I know it's hard out there for a woman. I'm out there as a woman, but at the same time, we all need to be held to the same level of accountability. And if the facts are they are doing their students a disservice, and we know that they are, but they're continuing to do it, we're going to call them out on it. These people who are profiting from their current model, right? Why would they change their tune? It's not in their best interest. But, the tide is changing, and we are seeing more Pilates and yoga teachers who also strength train and who understand that the two things don't interfere with each other, right? Who understand that they don't need to be afraid of getting bulky, that strength training is not dangerous, who have started to also bust these myths for themselves. And I think our most successful tactic across the board is just continuing to show up and show proof in ourselves, in our own work, in the people that we work with. I wish, I don't really wish this, but if HIPAA didn't exist, I would have so much video of like my incredible patients, obviously with their permission, showing like, oh, day one was a 5-pound dumbbell and now they're overhead pressing a 45-pound barbell or something like that. I think just providing more and more examples of proof and facts, and to Laurel's point, also not coming at it in a way that's trying to denigrate or shame or make someone feel stupid, but instead just to say, look, this is what you were told before, but we know that science is always changing, and this is currently the best possible practice for you, for your students, for your clients in this age range, and here's why, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak a little bit more to that social proof. We post on our Instagram page, Movement Logic Tutorials, images of women shared with permission in their living rooms, back squatting their barbells with their like cat wandering around behind them, and their furniture and their artwork, and it's just like this 50 or 60-year-old woman lifting some like big plates on the bar, right? And or we share testimonials from their experience. As Sarah said, we show up ourselves and throw down, and we don't try to become some like She-Ra person while we're doing it either. Like I made a video once of myself like petting my cat and sipping my tea, and then wandering over to the rack and doing some squat. Like we want to normalize this equipment / this habit as being a thing that like we do this now. This is what we're doing. Are you in? Let's go, right? This is something other people your age are doing. Look at what they have to say about it. Look at what the CDC and the WHO have to say about it. And like we overwhelm them with this various forms of evidence, right? And then we go, okay, now all this stuff you've heard before, who was telling it to you? Why? So let's actually look behind the curtain here and go, what's going on here? What is this message really about? Is it about your health? Or is it about something else? So let's talk about that. And now we're all going to get mad, right? Let's get mad so we can unite around a real emotion, one that's warranted. And then let's go, screw all of you. Now we're going to strength train as a political act, as an act of, we don't need this kind of negativity in our lives. We're going to get strong. We're going to put some muscle on our body. We're going to see what we're capable of. We're going to allow this process to change us in more ways than one. We're going to do it together. That's what we do. That's what we're passionate about. That's why we're here.
Preach.
Boom. I think that's a great place to stop. unless either of y'all want to add anything else, that may be a great ending point. Perfect.
Oh, that's it. Yeah.
I love it. Well, I appreciate y'all coming on and discussing these things and being a positive voice for these communities that y'all are a part of. And you have so many resources. So we'll link them all down below: your podcast, your website, your Instagram, so that people can find y'all and learn more from you. Sarah, Laurel, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This is a great honor. We love your
Chris.
podcast. We love your work. Keep
Thank
it up.
y'all.
Thank you so much. We're really thrilled to be here.
Yeah.